think we've got it. Okay. Our society was established as a chapter of the Idaho Native Plant Society in 1998. And then in 2010, we became the Kinnickinnick Native Plant Society, independent of the Idaho Native Plant Society. And you can see our mission there. It really boils down to education, conservation, and the use of native plants in landscaping and restoration. So we're all about native plants. If you have not been to the North Idaho Native Plant Arboretum at Lakeview Park, please visit, particularly in the spring or in the summer when things are flowering. It's just beautiful. So we established that, and we care for that through volunteer efforts. So if you want to volunteer in the Arboretum, please see us about that. Okay. We also publish a book called Landscaping with Native Plants in the Idaho Panhandle, and it's available at bookstores from Bonners Ferry down to Moscow and here around town in Sandpoint. And it's really useful for those of you or us that are landscaping, and we're always landscaping. If we're gardeners, we're always doing new things, and it's very, very useful for that. And we also have a brand new coloring activity book. Busy, Buzzy, Bombus Bee, Can You Color What I See? Available locally here at Sandpoint. And kids love that one, and some adults too. Upcoming events. We have a grant program. It's a $500 annual grant program, and named after in honor of our founder, Lois White. And those proposals are due at the end of the month. And Judy Lighting in the back there is the director of the grant program. So if you have any questions, if you're interested in the grant program and have any questions, please see Judy after the talk today. Got some more people coming in. Okay, our program next month, in fact, I got the date wrong there. It's actually in March. I forgot to change the date. It's the third Saturday in March, and it'll be right here in this room. It's going to be given by Liz Johnson-Gebhardt, who's executive director of the Priest Community Forest Connection and a community nonprofit rep on the Panhandle Forest Collaborative. She'll be talking about those two organizations. If you haven't visited our website, it's easy, nativeplants.org. And we have a Facebook page. Become a member, give a donation. We're a volunteer organization, but we have an arboretum to maintain, books to print, and distribute. So we can always use some extra money. And now that leads me to introducing our speaker for today. Oh, yes. Thank you, Sherry. There is for those of you who are not members of the Kinnickinnick Native Plant Society and do not get our emails, if you want to get our emails, we're passing around the sign-up sheet for that. Okay, so let's get on with the program here. Okay, so our speaker, another person coming in, is going to be talking about his adventures in the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. That's going to be Dr. James Peak. He's a retired professor of wildlife biology at the University of Idaho. He's a member of CAMPS. He's a member of the Idaho Native Plant Society. We are co-sponsored by the library here and by the Sandpoint Parks and Recreation. A little bit about Jim. He majored in wildlife ecology with minors in botany and range ecology at Montana State University and in wildlife ecology and forestry at the University of Minnesota. He worked for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks for 8 years, then went on to the University of Minnesota, where he earned a PhD and taught wildlife courses. He came to the University of Idaho in 1973 to teach, retired in 1999, but continued to guide graduate students and finish his research, some of which will be described in this talk today. He finally completely retired after finishing a history of the Lochsaw elk herd, which was published in 2021, and he worked with antlered and horned game, plus wolves and bears over his years as a wildlife ecologist, biologist, and what a fascinating field to be in. So let's welcome Jim Peak. Be able to go in your pocket.
Somewhere.
Yeah. And I will get your
That mouse work.
It does. And let's see. So you can use the pointer.
Yeah, that's
and,
good.
And you can use the space bar to move ahead.
All right, sounds
Okay.
good. Preston does a pretty good job of herding speakers around too, as a matter of fact.
Oh, one thing I forgot to say. Thank you for the treats and the coffee today from Vicki and Isabel and everybody else that contributed to those. Thank you.
I thought maybe I'd start off by telling you about my first experience with kinnikinick in Idaho. It was on the South Fork. Where are we at here? How do I get back?
Arrow here.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
where you want to be?
I want to be on the map.
Get on that.
Yeah, there's the South Fork. Right there. What did I have? I was still working in Minnesota, but the dean of the College of Forestry here in Idaho called, and my predecessor had taken a job looking at the grizzly bears in Yellowstone, and they needed somebody to attend the summer camp down there, a wildlife biologist, and the summer camp was in McCall. And so I asked the department head back at St. Paul if that would be okay if I showed up out here for a week, and he said, sure. So we got down with a class, the class headquarters out of McCall, but there was a field trip down to the South Fork of the Salmon. And there was an exclosure in the Buckhorn Bar down there next to a campground. So we were going to camp there and then go up to this exclosure. And these exclosures, we'll talk about them a lot, were put in the late 40s and 50s to demonstrate what deer were doing to the vegetation. They had huge buku deer populations. And so we went up to the bar, to the exclosure, and the bar itself was a beautiful stand of ponderosa pine over bitterbrush. Bitterbrush being a major deer winter forage. And but you look into the exclosure, and the bitterbrush was all beat up and festooned with lichens and everything. And underneath, here's this beautiful stand of Ursus arctos, or Ursi. So the principal instructor asked me what I thought the habitat type was. And I smelled a rat. I thought, I'm getting a test on this. And when you looked around the bar, there was one lonesome Douglas fir. And inside you had this kinnikinick, beautiful understory, and not much bitterbrush anymore, and a little bit of snowberry. And I thought, I wonder if this is a Douglas fir snowberry, common snowberry kinnikinick phase habitat type. And we got along pretty well after that. That principal instructor had seen combat as a Marine, and he took no prisoners. And at the University of Idaho, that meant he took no prisoners. Faculty didn't like, and the students, they were pretty tough. He had a test that was mimeographed, 50 pages on one mimeograph sheet, and your first test was to see if you could identify the question. And the chances of you passing the test were 50-50 at best. I mean, that guy was tough. My wife said one of the things about our marriage that kept us together in good shape was patience and repetition. And I certainly saw a lot of repetition over the next 20 years with that guy being the teacher, and he was sure the best forest ecologist I learned from. So that was my experience with,
Jim, I'm gonna have
with Kinnickinnick.
you talk for a minute. We were having trouble with the Zoom audience here. They're not seeing your screen. So just go ahead and continue and I will fix it. Yeah, just
All right.
go ahead. Yeah, I need to. Yeah. Sorry. They're not getting that screen. Getting this one instead.
My task today, right off, is to convince you that the Frank is improving and returning to its original condition. That's the bottom line. Just one thing I want to tell you. But my task is to show you the data sets that lead me to believe that that's the conclusion that we should have.
Trying to get the screen up. Sorry about this, folks.
There's the Frank at around the Depression in the 30s and whatnot was loaded up with a whole lot of homesteaders.
I'm set.
Okay.
Got it.
And well, let me go back a little bit. This is wilderness. It's the biggest wilderness in the U.S. It's lower U.S. 2,200,000 acres. And according to the 1964 Wilderness Act, a wilderness, in contrast with those areas where man and his works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. Well, there's a little problem with that. We've had man himself who's not been a visitor in any of these wilderness areas. And even the cocktail wilderness, ice cocktail wilderness like the cabinets up here, I'm sure a Ponderay and a Kootenai and somebody else ran up the hill if for no other reason to go up the hill and maybe grab a goat or some dang thing up there. But anyway, I object to the idea that wilderness is untrammeled. But I think us white men, we don't have to trammel it. So I'm not too argumentative about this. These are pictographs. They're 600-700 years old. They're down in the gorge in Big Creek. Obviously people were catching salmon down there in Steelhead. And I don't know whether these marks are the number of salmon they got that day or what, but anyway, they're there, and there's a lot of evidence, all over the US and Canada, all over North America about whether these are trammeled or not. The other thing about wilderness is when it was established, Frank Church was a senator, and he sold it as what they called dispersed recreation. In other words, you're going to go in there with your backpack or your mule or whatever, and you're going to camp, but there isn't going to be a campsite for you. Well, I have an objection to that too. I'm a disciple of Aldo Leopold here, and I see wilderness also as a land laboratory, and that's actually written into the 1964 Act. So that's the argument that I have. The university has an inholding in there, the Taylor Ranch. This was some of the very first work. These folks here, Hornacher, affiliated with the University of Idaho at the time, and Wilbur was the guy that ran the dogs. And that was the very first major work on mountain lions. cougars. These things here, this isn't in the wilderness, pretty obvious, and the guy wasn't too happy when he discovered they were using his tires to sharpen their claws, but then that's the way it goes. The wilderness says that wilderness, as far as the wildlife complement is concerned, is pretty close to being intact. We need some grizzly bears in there. They'll get there eventually. There probably weren't many in the first place, but that's important. And of course, the anadromous fish, Chinook and steelhead, are way down. And Jess Taylor, who sold the ranch to the university, says that they had huge numbers. And then when Lower Granite came in, why those huge numbers didn't go. The Forest Service has seen fit to allow the fires to burn as much as possible in there. And the Big Creek drainage, for which we did a lot of our work in, is had about 200,000 acres burned in there, lightning strike. As near as I can tell, my prediction was the elk were really going to benefit and the deer were really going to hurt, because a lot of the woody plants that the deer focus on were going to be burned out of there. And the elk, the grasses should increase. Well, I was exactly 180% dead wrong. And we'll show you why. There is research not only on the wildlife in there, but here's they have fish traps in there. And what do I do to press back? I missed a slide here, growing. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a trap to catch primarily Chinook smolt, and then the fisheries people are what they do is they put the smolt back in the buckets and take them back up. They're all marked by then, and then they're trying to get estimates on the number of smolt that are coming down at least that far. The ranch itself is down in there. And that's the Bighorn Crags. The Middle Fork of the Salmon is there about 8 miles away. And I'd take people up on this ridge, and so they could see the Bighorn Crags. There's maybe 25 people see the Bighorn Crags from the west side. And there's elk in there that don't know there's a hunt. Nobody in their right mind goes down there and hunts those things in that kind of country. The access to the Taylor Ranch is a 37-mile trail or by plane. And when I first flew over this country, the pilot who knew the country said, "There's the Taylor Ranch strip." And I said, "Where's that?" You couldn't see it down there. The way you access it is either with stock or on Shanks Mare, or by plane. And the Cessna 206 is the workhorse in that country. We'd have students in there, interns and whatnot. There happened to be one here today, and that's 16 miles. We walk up in there onto this place, and we had plots up in there that provide some of the information I'll show you. My wife belongs to a hiking group in the Moscow area. These were all 45, 50-year-old women. I knew them all, and they wanted to go into the Taylor Ranch. So I had to set up a class, and I set up a class through the extension people, and then we wound up having to open it up to everybody. So they had to register just as soon as it opened up, or it was going to go. Well, then I would fly them into Cabin Creek, which is, there's a nice strip there. It's about 10 miles from the Taylor Ranch, and then we would walk down from there, and there was a chance to see bighorn in mid afternoon coming down for a drink, and then there's spawning beds and all kinds of stuff to show. And then that night, we kept this class going for 7 years, and then we would all sit around a campfire like this. So with these women, and I knew them all now, I said, all right, now this is a university sanctioned class, and we've got some standards here, and there's going to be a test. And that test is going to be, what did you see or hear today, or smell, or whatever, that caught your imagination? And you'd be surprised how often we'd see different things in there. But anyway, the next day, I wanted to tell them about grass. There's 5 different habitat types, different kinds of grass stands on this slope. And then up there, there's a burn up in here, and there's a bluebird. So I told everybody, okay, we're going to climb that 3,000 feet up to there, and so you can see the bluebird. And then you're going to hear all about the grass all the way up. Well, so we take off, and we get pretty close to the top, and I've been belaboring the grass and whatnot with them and all this, and all at once they all take off. And the old boy is left in the lurch, and everybody's sitting up there. And one of them says, Dr. Peak, are you okay? You need some water? Where's the bluebird? And that's the first time any of them had ever called me Dr. Peak, and I knew I'd been had. But we did a lot of work on that. This is the way we could fly about 12 people in there, and there's that 206. Okay, well, to get to some of the information, these are exclosures that were put in there in the 50s. One was in Cave Creek up on Big Creek. The Flying Bee is an inholding. Reservoir Flying Bee, that's all elk winter range, deer winter range too. The Wyeth Graves, that's on the Mormon Ranch side. And then Cow Creek is on up, and the Hood Ranch is up around Little Creek. That's the Forest Service. So that's the area. And here's the Middle Fork going down, hits the main stem salmon, and then the salmon is flowing west. Well, I'm not going to belabor this, but we had methodology that we took. Okay, there's my very favorite plant, blue bunch wheatgrass. It's the miserable geneticists have changed it again. The geneticists do those of us that never paid any attention to genetics. Not a disservice, a service really. They're finding out just exactly what these things really, their relationships are. But anyway, I was interested in this. I'll show you some slides. You can go down the Middle Fork. I've floated it a number of times and then taken stock down it. The best way to see it is with stock, because you're above all those miserable floaters that are down there in those muddy camps and all, and you're up in some really spectacular country. But we did a lot of clipping, as you can see, and I was interested in this because the bighorn the winter ranges and the habitats that those bighorn sheep in there use are just spectacular grasslands. And how do they graze the grass that at what level? Well, you can see the amount of weight at about 80%. You've got most of the weight already done, and we finally found out that the grazing by bighorn, we had individual plants marked in there, and I'd fly in a couple of times a day, a year, once in July, and then during President's Day, and hope to God that I could get out for classes on that one. But anyway, we were able to, and basically those sheep are grazing at about 20%. So they're taking the tips, just not the, see that, just this part of it. That's, and we'll show you how.
Just use the pointer there. You can, yeah, then they can see. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a grass stand. That sticks to one of these exclosures. You can see that that's pretty tall. See, it's coming up onto my wife's knees here. And here's one. This is a wheatgrass balsam root habitat type, and it's about that's about as snazzy it gets in that country. And this is sheep habitat. That kid there wound up being the director for ODF and W over in Portland, and chief of game management in Idaho, incidentally, so the wilderness didn't hurt it too much. Okay, here's the exclosure. Forest Service saw fit to take all the fences down as best they could. And this is one they took down, but this is inside the exclosure. This is about 16 miles up from the Taylor Ranch. You look outside, you can see what it looked like inside with all that sagebrush, and look at it outside. See, there's hardly any of it left. So they were protecting the sagebrush from the deer is what it boiled down to. You can see the site real easy. The bunch grass, that long live plants, got through all the deer, got through all the grazing, no problem, without much change. But its productivity was about double outside when compared to that where that exclosure had been. And the density, of course, was higher on big sage. That's mountain big sage, Artemisia tridentata vasiana, inside than outside. And the productivity was about 5 times higher inside than outside as a result. And then there was a lot of dead sage out. And the bitter brush, there's bitter brush around, and about 2 times higher inside than outside, but no differences in density or productivity. But lots of twigs more inside than outside. The Hood Ranch, this is up around Little Creek, Indian Creek. The floaters, when the Middle Fork starts to dry up, why they'll fly into Indian Creek and go from there instead of Dagger Falls. This is one of the exclosures that they had taken out, and this is in 1990. And this is above Little Creek, the Forest Service guard station in there. Outside, you can see what it looks like. There's scattered heath goldenrod. I know it as rubber rabbit brush. And then you can see the big wheatgrass and some sage. And then outside, they actually planted some carragana in there, if you can believe it. You can see what that did. But outside, there's not much rubber rabbit brush or Ericameria or whatever, Heath goldenrod, whatever you want to call it, or sage. And there's the herbaceous communities are about the same. Still some sage inside where the exclosure was. More Heath goldenrod outside than inside. But there's a lot of dead plants outside too. And then green rabbit brush was 3 times greater inside. Differences in bitter brush and whatnot as well. Of interest, this is the Forest Service pasture. This is the Thomas Creek landing strip. That's the Forest Service pasture, and the buildings are around the corner. That's got the densest stand of big sagebrush in it anywhere I saw in the Middle Fork. And they've just, what they do is, of course, they'll bring their stock in and stick it in that place, and they graze the grasses, the stock does, but there's a result why the bitter brush or the big sage benefits. The benches at Big Creek, that fire, that 200,000 acre fire, this is what it actually looks like. You can see where it occurred around on the Big Creek benches that we would walk up. This is all bighorn winter range. And you can see that the bighorn, we saw this with other fires in the Middle Fork too. The fires don't burn everything off. They leave spots and whatnot. The sheep are able to handle, live out on these unburned spots, no problem. This is the picture. Yeah, you get a good one here. You can see them grazing on the wheatgrass there. My wife ran over there, stood up with a 400 millimeter lens and went click. And when she came back, oh my God, it's going to be all blurry and everything else. So I went over there, laid down, got a steady picture and click. Well, mine has a whole lot of grass fading out the sheep. That's her picture. Okay, this is some of the changes from the fire. This is the wheatgrass during before, and then here's the after the fire, and then one growing season later. We had data sets on this, and this is the biomass. You can see what it does, what predicts biomass, and that's really well. See the stuff that's observed is the solid line, and the stuff where we're using some math to predict it is the dotted line. And you can see that the best regression is April and May precip, which is nothing ever that you would ever disagree with. The nitrogen, we had that, and you can see that that's May precip and May temp and June temp. In other words, when it's a little warmer, why, you get a little more nitrogen coming in. This is mahogany. That's a highly palatable shrub. The nitrogen content in mahogany, we're able to predict that just pretty darn well, really. And it's June, precip, and mean temperature. Those are that's a real close prediction. Here it is, twig weights instead of nitrogen. And you can see the weights in 94, 95 went way up. And our prediction is nowhere near as good. It's still plenty significant if you're interested in statistics, but you're going to see some anomalies. And the interesting thing is the October temperature seemed to be the best thing that predicted it. mellow 9-bark. This is my favorite. There was a Douglas fir 9-bark stand right in back of the Taylor Ranch that we studied, and I purposely picked 9-bark to look at because everybody hates it. You can't. Those stands are very difficult for foresters to work with when they have understories. Here's what it looked like prior to the fire, after the fire, and then 5 years later. And here's the predictions. January temp, December precip. In other words, a cold December and a warmer January seemed to work it. But look at the prediction. See, the fire was in 2000, and look at how that stuff grew after that. And the prediction didn't take advantage of the fire. 9-bark nitrogen worked pretty well, and you can see that the observed stuff was higher than the prediction. Again, what happens is you burn a 9-bark stand, you're going to make it much more productive, just what you're going to do. So it's not indicated if you're a forester trying to grow Douglas fir in a 9-bark. And see, this is April temperature in June here. So, or it's negative April temperature. So cold April and then June. There's a bench, just a gravel bar, and before the fire, it was heavily covered with big sage, and you can see the big sage stands after the fire. The flying bee, this is an in-holding up there, about halfway down the Middle Fork if you're a floater. And there's a site here. That's actually, that exposure is still in there. Inside, it's a nice stand of wheatgrass, big sage. You can see what the bitterbrush looks like when it gets protected. It gets festooned with lichens, and then it gets decadent. So actually some level of deer browsing, mule deer browsing on bitterbrush is pretty keeps it productive. You can see what it looks like outside. See, they're still running stock down there, and they get a little bit of balsam root in there, but you can see what the grasses are. There's a pretty heavy grazing in that area. Wheatgrass, higher inside, and no lesser spike moss or any of those other species outside, and difference. And then tree tip, Artemisia tripartita, is taller with longer twig lengths inside, and this area is grazed by stock and mule deer. There's other exclosures. This is a shot that Ned Pence, I don't know if any of you knew the Pences that come out of Mackay. They were in the Forest Service and Soil Conservation Service. And their old man ran the grocery store in Mackay, and they would go in there, and luckily I wound up with these photographs. Look at how dense that stuff is, 1925 when it was being grazed. You go back to that area now and you see it's a lot like the shrub component is starting to decline. There's what it looks like. That's the pack string they run in there. They got 3 guys and what is that, 20 odd head of stock. You can see the difference. See, not so much on a real dry site like this, it wasn't subject to much grazing. This is one last exclosure, And this is up around Loon Creek. And you can see it's got a pretty good stand of big sage and bitterbrush in it. The other side of it, though, is they put it on about 2 or 3 different habitat types, so it's not as good. If they would have stuck it up somewhere on one site, why, we'd have learned a little bit more about it. The 3-tip sage, there's no comparisons outside. And it may be, that's pretty palatable, big 3-tip, so that may be the reason. Well, here's the conclusions that we've got. The early grazing, 1930s drought, primary causes of initial increases in shrubs with fire suppression. Of course, we had to control the fires also involved. Back then, the habitat changes and removal of stock, and including sending off hunters to World War II. Not that it would have made any difference, because you could have probably had a market hunt on mule deer in that country. It's so far removed from anywhere, and it wouldn't have made a much difference. But anyway, the removal of hunters and stock and the habitat change that resulted probably had a lot to do. Predator relationships may be implicated too. I've learned after this that they poisoned everything they could do in that country, just like they did everywhere else in the West. And so there weren't many predators in there. Wolves, coyotes, cougars were gone, bears. And so I'm sure that had a lot to do with the increases in mule deer. Then subsequent changes have generally been increasing grasses, reductions in shrubs. The exceptions being around in holdings where they're still grazing it pretty hard. And in some less prevalent communities, such as 3-tip. And their current trends, from what I can hear from the literature, may be more affected by increased, global warming, carbon dioxide concentrations, and restoration of the natural fire regimes. And now we've got elk in there. The value of retaining exclosures, this is the guy that likes the science side more than the recreation talking here, but the value of retaining exposures and monitoring vegetation in wilderness will assist in understanding natural fluctuations in composition and productivity of native vegetation. There's a huge amount of those are dry sites. You look at them, and especially just the grasses, such as on that slope above the Taylor Ranch, and you think, gosh, there's hardly any diversity on it. And then when you start looking at how these different species respond to different temperature and moisture regimes, you realize that it's an extraordinarily complex system. Can you imagine what it is up here in cedar hemlock? Wow. We feel that the Middle Fork of the salmon is approaching original vegetative conditions. Time and fire are involved, along with removal of grazing pressure and reductions in mule deer. Shrub step shows a lot of natural changes in biomass and nutrient content, which will have an effect on wildlife. And then, of course, there's always the caveat. It always needs to be checked. The science never stops. And then also the reading I'm getting, the climate change may have an effect on biomass prior to species composition, but we may start seeing shrubs back in there, if more shrubs, if the climate heats up. Preston, that's it.
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions for Jim. I'll pass the mic around.
Okay. My question was, you had talked about them taking livestock in there. How do they actually get the livestock in there?
Well, they just go them in. Probably a lot of that came in from the salmon side, salmon Idaho side. They'd go over Myers Cove down. That's 16 miles from Myers Cove, which is the end of the road. And that road goes up Morgan Creek, which is a major road out of Salmon, south of Salmon.
And who was it the Bureau of Lands that was taking the cattle in?
No, these were private individuals. They were in their homesteaders.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't make that clear.
And then how long were they leaving the cattle up there?
Well, they were in there full time.
Oh, they left them up there.
Oh, yeah, hogs and sheep,
Oh, wow.
probably a goat or two. Yeah, there was quite a number of people in the Middle Fork country back in the days of yore. Ma'am.
It's on.
You mentioned in the conclusions poisoning. What was the source of the poisoning?
Say.
You mentioned poisoning in the conclusions. What was
Oh.
the source of the poisoning?
Those guys, those homesteaders in there would run a cougar with their dogs, kill the cougar, skin the hide, get the claws, and then lace the carcass with strychnine. That's that's what that was common practice. And then not only in the Middle Fork.
So it would decompose the strychnine.
Well, the strychnine, everything in there, everything from coyotes and whatever else was in there was going to eat it, crows, and ravens, and bald eagles and golden eagles, you name it, that was it's a lot more diverse now than it was 70 years ago. No question about it. We're slightly less cruel towards the wildlife resource. I wish we were a little bit more positive about all of the resource, As a wildlife biologist, I don't differentiate between predators and the rest, I'm responsible for, I think, the resource.
Are any of those ranches still populated?
No, a lot of those are gone, but there were old cabins and whatnot in there, but that big fire took a good share of that out. It burned down a couple buildings at the Taylor Ranch, and there was a major fire over on the Flying Bee. They saved most of that, but those were huge fires.
The property is still private, right?
No, it's all been abandoned. It's U.S. Forest Service. The Frank was established with the Aeronautical Commission, though, requesting that all the strips in there be kept, and some of them should be left or should be abandoned for the sake of the people trying to fly into them. But the Aeronautic Commission actually has jurisdiction on strips in the Frank.
I was a student at the University of Idaho in the mid-1980s, and one of my housemates was a caretaker at Taylor Ranch. She was a graduate student there and spent one semester living in the house that I was part of the community. And I've been trying all morning to remember her name. Do you remember the couple that was the caretakers of Taylor Ranch?
Yeah. My memory is great from 1950 to 1970, and from now until about 5 minutes ago. So I'm short on that one, but I could get it for you real fast with a phone call.
Thank you. It's been, it was a lot of fun having her as a housemate. It's the only time I got to eat.
Oh, yeah. Well, it doesn't look like the University of Idaho hurt you too much.
No.
Jim, are there any other enclosures, exclosures still existing in there?
No, there's one we missed, but most of them are torn down. Forest Service isn't big on research anywhere, as near as I can tell.
Right. Here's a question from Jane Fritz online. Once wolves were reintroduced in the mid 1990s, do you think the grassland habitat changed for bighorn deer and elk populations?
Once
Okay,
wolves,
once wolves were reintroduced in the mid 90s, do you think the grassland habitat changed? And something related to the bighorn deer and elk populations.
you'll notice that I tacitly ignored the wolf.
Okay, for a reason.
When the wolves were put in Indian Creek, which is quite a ways up the Middle Fork, and they showed up in the Selway the next winter. The wolves that were in the Locksaw and the Selway have basically reduced those elk herds way down. And the elk herd in the Middle Fork in Big Creek, we went in there one year. I flew a class in there in March, and we marched the 10 miles up to the elk winter range and overnighted up there in the snow. And the next day we were hoping to see wolves, but what we saw was about 100 head of elk and 3 calves. And this was before the wolves had much to do with it. Though the elk herd was very unproductive, and it was already on the way down. And then you drop a wolf pack or 2 in there, and put them in there on a deep snow winter when there's lots of cold, and then see how they do. That's what happened in the Yellowstone, and here's the elk trying to wander around in deep snow, and there's the wolf pitter patter on top. No wonder we had major increases in wolves in there. I had a class. One of the last classes I went in there was a bunch of wolf biologists from all over. I guess I didn't put that photo up, but the conclusion you get from what we know about this, Holly and Jim Atkinson, yeah, they examined a lot of wolf-killed elk in there, and every one of them had some kind of a, anomaly, a lot of, that's really steep country, and you start running those things, elk, across real steep country and the rocks and everything, and they don't do well. But the deer do. And the conclusion that we're drawing, which needs to be done, is that steep, rocky, rough Middle Fork country, a lot of central Idaho, is probably more deer and cougar country than it is wolf and elk country. And if you're a hunter, why, you're going to kill me. But I wouldn't be surprised when we're going to see shifts in large mammal component in there. Wolves will probably decline. Cougars will probably stay where they're at if we quit killing them. And the mule deer should probably do okay, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the elk herds go down. And you don't want to hear a wildlife biologist working for the Idaho Fish and Game using that kind of language, because they're going to get hurt.
Any other questions? Any final questions for Jim? If not,
So my understanding from what you said is that in the exclusions, the bushes were less healthy than they were outside the exclusions?
Yeah, we're gonna see less shrubs in there. There's a lot of the understories will have a better chance without the grazing. And perhaps with the fires.
And so the deer or the ruminants graze on the brush a lot then.
Well, when we were in there, my wife and I spent a winter in there. And there was a 17 inches of snow, which is about as much as you get on the bottoms there. And when you look around, you'd see deer way up on north faces in stands up high, whereas all the elk are over on the south face grazing the grasses. Those crazy deer are up there where there are shrubs and whatnot. And then see those shrubs respond pretty fast. And even 9 bark is palatable for a few years after it's burned. So I think that's the reason that we're seeing mule deer increases. And I don't think that they're as easy to take in there by a wolf as the elk are either. A lot of that's speculation on my part. I did have a graph. I can't find it that shows what's happened to the elk, but game department doesn't census them enough to really know what's going on in there. The guide outfitters would be the ones to know. And they're not happy with the wolves.
I was curious if you were part of any studies correlating anadromous fish and the biology and landscape. Plants correlated to spawning salmon. Like nitrogen levels in plants correlated with how many salmon made it up that year, or if as dams went in, the plants on the banks of the streams changed.
I'm not sure I understood all that. You'll have to pardon me. But I'm not a fisheries
Yeah,
biologist.
sure. I just was curious if there were any studies that were trying to correlate salmon runs to the plants.
Yeah, there are in Alaska. You get those big runs up there, and the bears will feed on them and all this, and then the nutrient contents go up in some level up above the stream, up on the slopes, so that predation and then just the dead fish that get carried up there by whatever birds actually enhances the nutrient content in those areas. We floated the no attack one time, and that drains the west side of the Brooks Range. It's clear stream, and I had the privilege of seeing what a salmon run that's not being monkeyed with can look like. And there's salmon spawning, salmon dead, salmon coming in from the salt. Salmon all over all the time. And then I want to tell you, it just takes your breath away. And the fact that we don't have those down here when we once did tells you something.
Before we wrap up, an announcement from John Casey. Important event.
And because it ties into this, otherwise I would not take away that next Friday, the International Wildlife Film Festival is at the Sandlord. My heart with that. And unfortunately, our big park students have another issue right now. And that is, for those of us who go skiing in the backcountry, they used to be all alone, we're not anymore. And one of the films is featuring the impact of backcountry skiers on big park sheep populations, because they used to kind of have winter for themselves, but they don't.
Thanks, John. Okay, let's give Jim a big hand and. There's more trees.